Right, so we're recording. So are we ready to let everybody in? We've got 95 people waiting at the moment. So
exciting! God, that's good.
Let them eat cake. Let them wait.
Here they come.
Fingers.
Okay, welcome everybody.
Look at you all.
Welcome everybody. So good evening everybody, and welcome to the fourth question and answer session in association with the MCC Members Independent Online Pavilion. I'd like to welcome all MCC members and their guests. Thank you for joining us tonight. We have another very special guest this evening to take your questions. Thank you so much to Rory Bremner for giving up his time this evening to make lockdown without cricket just a little bit more bearable.
What a great big feat.
In a minute, I'm going to ask John Fingleton, or Fingers as most of you know him, to introduce our guest. But in the meantime, just a very quick bit of housekeeping. Please do keep your microphones muted until you're asked to put your questions. Otherwise, we do get a lot of background noise. If you've already told me you'd like to ask a question, I will call you in turn to speak. If you haven't sent in a question, but there's anything you want to ask Rory, please do so. Use the Zoom messaging facility so we can see you. And if we have time, you can join in. The first three questions are from Derek Wheeler, Edward Collier and Tony Curry. So would they please get ready? So John, over to you to make the introduction for us.
Well, I think I've said this before, but if there's anyone who doesn't need an introduction, whoever he is, it's Rory Bremner. The only thing is, you might not recognize him by his voice because no one knows what his real voice sounds like. But he is rather clever. And if I said it's a bit later in the day, he will know what it means, because it's a private joke between him and me, which has been running now for what, about 30 years, Rory?
90, I think.
1990, so 30 odd years. 90 years. Even worse. Anyway, here we are later in the day, and I'm not going to bother with any Wikipedia entries or anything like that, because there is only one Rory Bremner, whoever he might be. And I'm going to start just with one very quick question, just to kick it off, but I'm not part of the formal questioning. But I was sorry to see, incidentally, that your former scriptwriter, very good, John Langdon, very good obituary of him yesterday, which must be a bit of a blow.
Yeah, well,
to have lost him.
Yeah, I've lost two people, in fact, funnily enough. John, just before coronavirus, he taught me everything I know about writing, but not everything he knows, because he knew much more than I did. Just a remarkable character. He, if you were around in the 1980s and were on the London Underground and saw those posters for Borscht and Tears, the Russian restaurant, it was a poster sort of packed with jokes. And I remember, you wouldn't mind if a train went past or you'd miss a train because, you'd be reading that poster. And that was, I think, before advertising, humor is so much part of advertising now, but then it was kind of original. And I was at the Edinburgh Festival 1984, my first stand-up show with Mark Steele and Jenny Eclair. And Jenny Campbell, the BBC Radio 2 producer, came along to see the show, and she wanted me to do a Radio 2 Best of the Fringe show. And she wanted me to link the whole, all the acts with voices of different people. And she introduced me to John, said, John will write your script with you. And that was in 1984. And we were writing right up to the beginning of this year, 2 months before he died. Remarkable guy. He looked Russian. He was very, very thin, had a sort of gaucho moustache. He played balalaika and guitar in a Russian, sort of cod Russian duet. Bibbs, who's a balalaika player, brilliant balalaika player, and John, whose Russian name was Vanya Podzobnikov, which, forgive me, it's early in the evening, but it means John underneath the arsehole. That was the way, that was John. He was just... he was obsessed with finding out about anything from Mercedes to sewing machines to shoe lasts. And when he died, he's got 150 sewing machines, so his family got a bit of a problem with that. But just a great, great character. And the best times of my life were when we were doing Bremner, Bird and Fortune, and John and I would be writing right up until the last minute. I'd be in the makeup chair, and we'd be rewriting it. And then literally you could hear the audience being warmed up with the warm-up guy and the laughter. And John and I would finish the script. He'd rush round to the auto cue lady, and they'd make the changes. I'd do the last touches of makeup. I'd be introduced, and John would be jumping up and down going, kill, 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 to sort of get my energy up. And off we went and we did the shows. And they were just the happiest days working with three Johns, really. John Bird, John Fortune, and John Langdon, who I've just been talking about. So, yeah. And the second one, of course, who some of the Taverner members will know, Tim Brooke-Taylor, who died on around the Easter weekend. And we've been touring doing I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue in January, and he was such wonderful company, a lovely guy, loved his sport, loved his football with Derby County, and loved cricket. I think he was the chairman of the Taverners at one stage, but such a contented, funny guy. And you'd be playing these 1,500-seat theatres, and the joy, the love, and the affection that there was for Tim was just wonderful. So, and John Langdon and I were working on the scripts. And the last email that John sent me, we were coming up with slogans for companies. You're changing slogans, so it'd be things like, I think. I can't really. It was a bit of a rude one that Tim used to do. Can I do?
You can be rude, Rory. We're past the watershed.
Okay. Well, Tim Brooke Taylor's one of his, and it did get the biggest laugh, and that was you had to come up with new slogans for companies, and his one was Tampax. We may not be number one, but we're up there. That was, forgive me, I'm so sorry. So my one was, and I was writing, and John and I were writing and sending stuff to each other. We've just lost half the audience, or 3/4 of the audience. And John and I were writing these slogans, and I'd written one about Meghan and Harry, which was SussexRoyal.com, air today, gone tomorrow. And as I sent it, I got an email in from John, and I looked down the script, and there at the bottom of the script, he'd written the same joke. So the last exchange we had, without knowing, we'd sent each other the same joke. And I just think that's something just very beautiful, really. Yeah. And I miss him. We used to say, I miss him like a limb. And we used to say, like a married couple, we finished each other's sandwiches, John used to say, because sentences was too boring unless you were Jack D, who would always say that married couple who would finish each other's sentences like Fred and Rosemary West. So, so how are we doing? Is this all too much for fun?
No, this is fine. Shall we go on to our first question? We've got Derek Wheeler. Derek, would you like to ask Rory your question?
Hi, Rory. Thanks.
Hello.
Thank you indeed for coming tonight. Before I start my question, yes. We've been running a whole series of quizzes and polls on the online pavilion. Favourite sportsman, favourite grounds, and one of the questions was best after dinner speaker, and I nominated you.
Thank you.
Because I support Fulham, and about 15 years ago, you were the surprise cabaret at a club dinner, and you took the piss out of Al Fayed. It was absolutely brilliant. So thanks for that.
Surprise to me, surprise to him too. I remember, are you old enough to remember Wilson, Keppel and Betty? The three of those, scare 'em, da, 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 da. And I thought because Al Fayed is Egyptian, so I thought I'd do a sort of Wilson, Keppel and Betty, and it was like, I remember I wrote, do you remember, because it was all about sort of money passing hands and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. And I think it was, now remember, I'm trying to remember this from 15 years ago, but it was, see the chairman, generous bloke, what's it? That's it. See the chairman, generous bloke, £40,000 not a joke. How he get that in the envelope? He's the chairman. He's from Cairo. And then somebody told me he's from Alexandria. So, but anyway, we still did it. But yeah, that was great. So I didn't know the first thing about Fulham, but yeah, that's the challenge. That's the fun of after dinner speaking, because sometimes much more nowadays, you do briefing calls and you find out a little bit about the company, and you find out who the people are and what makes them tick and what makes them cross as well, what gets under their skin. And it's each evening, each audience is different. I did one the other day for some Pony Club DCs, district commissioners, and they're very, very doughty bunch of matrons usually, so for them I said, I was very nervous speaking to them that evening, because it was the first time that before I did the show I had to have a tack inspection. Because if you know about horses, you know that part of the rules, you have to have a tack inspection to make sure your saddle and everything is okay. But so you just, it's making up material that suits that particular occasion, suits that particular time. So yeah, Fulham, I remember that. Anyway, your question.
Yes. My question is, who do you rate of the current young comedian stroke satirists, and who do you candidly think is overrated?
Oh, I can't say the second. No. So the good ones, well, Chris Morris, I think he's been going quite a long time, but if you've seen his films like Four Lions, that's just one. He's, and obviously when he did the Day to Day, but about 20 years ago, but he is one of the sort of darkest and most you know, imaginative. I love Andy Zaltzman, who's, you'll know Andy Zaltzman, cricket fans will know Andy Zaltzman because he's got a double life as the scorer, the sort of the Bill Frindle, the bearded wonder, without the beard, on the Test Match Special, the One Day. So just nod if you've heard of Andy Zaltzman, you people there.
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Edward Collier's nodding. And he is so funny and inventive and well-informed. And he gets so many jokes into one sentence. I used to say when I was working with John that it's like an Indian train. You know, there's Indian trains where there's so many people hanging on to every part, every door and bits of the roof. And John's jokes were a bit like that, and Andy's jokes are a bit like that. There are so many funny twists. He said, I think he'd never read 2 autobiographies at once. He couldn't understand why Miley Cyrus was Hitler's favourite painter, because he was reading 2 autobiographies at once. So Andy's also Matt Ford. I did something with Matt the other day. We filmed a thing when I was Boris. Yes. Yeah, where are you? Are you up there? There, yes, I see. And I was doing Boris. I was doing Boris. And Matt had to play Donald Trump. And so the two of us were doing it virtually. Okay, virtually. Very clever. Technology, which I invented, by the way. I invented it. In fact, I invented these video calls, Zoom, like we're on now. And I did it before video. Because I'm a genius, you know? Genius, you know, that's, you know, they say Donald J. Trump. Okay, Donald J. Trump. That's what the J stands for. Genius. Okay. So Matt and I were doing that, and he's good. And I saw him in Edinburgh a few years ago, and I thought this is like my younger self, because he's in his 30s, and he's a satirist, political comedian, and impressionist. Does very good impressions. Always loved Stephen Fry. Who other? I mean, Eddie Izzard is another favourite of mine. Young, up and coming. Or are you writing all these down for your next corporate? Rob Deering, I love. He's a musical comedian. And Jan Ravens, I do lots of stuff with. Jan is the best female impressionist. She does wonderful, she did fantastic Theresa May, wonderful Hillary Clinton, wonderful Laura Koonsberg, all these voices. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good comedians out there. Rachel Parris as well on the MASH report. You've seen her. Yeah. So yeah, there's quite a few to be getting on with there.
Excellent, thank you. I'm sorry that we have to mute everybody because there's a lot of laughter there, which was obviously not coming across. But thank
God you muted that. I was beginning to think that.
You're just hearing me, I'm afraid. And
can I just say, Fingers, that is just the most wonderful. Fingers looks like he spent lockdown with Hezbollah. Yeah. Have you been chained to a radiator for 10 minutes? I mean,
I've tried to compete with Jerry Waite, I think, and one or two of the others who are out there for a long time.
I think maybe it's a wonderful beard, actually. You look like you could be an imam. You could be an imam.
That's very good.
Imagine Fingers. Can you imagine when you go to that rather splendid building behind you, James? You know, next time he walks in and he's learned Arabic. He's learned a great beard. And can you imagine what would happen if Fingers walked into the pavilion and said, Allah Akbar, first day of the Lord's test? Very embarrassing. Anyway.
That's more like Fingers than he is himself. That's
no.
That's fantastic.
I think that's a mark of fame.
I explain later in the day.
I think it's to have Rory do an impression of oneself.
Yes,
the pleasure is mine entirely.
For later in the day, that was Newlands in Cape Town, where we've had some wonderful times over the years. And we were in a box somewhere, and or just going. And so I said to Fingers, "Well, are you coming up? You coming up to the box?" He said,
"Later in the day."
And and Mark Nicholas, and I just because he said it as Fingers, I think I just had to say it straight back, didn't I?
Later in the day.
And Mark Nicholas, who was with me, we just burst out laughing.
So that became a sort of meme. We've got rather lasted a long time. A very long time ago, 1999, I met. I think it was the Atherton years.
That is a perfect impression, but it probably only means something to about half the people who are here today.
When I did ring Rory to ask him to do this, when I did ring him to ask him, when he answered the phone, I said later in the day, he said Fingers. So it worked, you know, it's our password.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, so the next
giveaway when your name came up on my phone there.
Edward Colley has been waiting for quite a long time. So Edward, would you like to come in and ask your question now?
Hello, Rory.
Hello.
In the age of Trump, Johnson and Bolsonaro, have we entered the time of post-satire? It feels a bit like Alan Partridge pitching monkey tennis. It's only a matter of time before satire becomes truth, whatever that is.
Well, it is. I remember it was Tom Lehrer who said that satire became obsolete when they gave the Nobel Peace Prize to Henry Kissinger, and that was in 1974. It's a bit of a change. You can look at it both ways. I know Ian Hislop said, you know, satire is easier these days because you do have these grotesques, which we had in the 80s in a way. We had with Thatcher and Reagan, you know, there was big figures. So Spitting Image kind of every week would have the big grotesque figures. But yeah, I mean, you know, when Trump came out of the blocks, I think he'd been president for about 3 months, and he said, you know, we just had the most successful 13 weeks in the history of the presidency, okay? Most successful 13 weeks. He'd been president for 11 weeks at that point. But he is, I mean, there's an expression, I don't know if you've heard of it, which is called jumping the shark. And jumping the shark, it's when the script writers in Happy Days, I think it was, and they had the Fonz, do you remember the Fonz? And he was water skiing and a shark appeared and he just jumped straight over it. And that was the point where people go, that's where script writers just completely leave all reality behind, and they just kind of, you know, oh, come on, that's just ridiculous, that's too far. And I think Trump jumped the shark when he said, you know, this stuff, well, first of all, you had hydroxychloroquine, okay? And I did a little tweet about that, about saying, you know, the doctors say there's this wonderful stuff I should take. They say, take this stuff, Mr. President. It's very good. Take it, take it. It's called chloroform. But when he started saying, you know, but, you know, you could take, why could you not take disinfectant? You know, could take, and that would do a great number on the lungs, or shine a torch. And you just think this is quite extraordinary. But, you know, there's a serious side to it because, you know, what's going on in America now. And it's just, I mean, the skill set that got him as the White House and that got Boris into number 10, it's just a million miles from the one you need when you got something like, you know, coronavirus, because you need a forensic mind and a sort of scientific mind, and not a sort of, you don't want a blusterer. You don't want somebody who just kind of, people say, you know, you couldn't make it up, but Trump does. He does it all the time. He makes it up, and so it's extraordinary. But he is involved in deep seriousness in America right now, and I don't know what's going on. Sometimes I think, you know, you have to find a new kind of satire, and that would mean almost fighting fire with facts. And, you know, if you fact check Trump, as the Washington Post has done, I think we're into around about 15,000 false claims or misleading statements that they've counted since he became president. He's not to the end of his first term yet. So do you make them clowns, or do you point out to people that, you know, these aren't, you know, that we're being governed by charlatans?
I've got to ask. I've got two waiting for very similar questions. So I wonder if I could ask Stuart Lewis, followed by Tony Curry. They're both on mic at the moment. Stuart, do you want to go first?
Thanks. Hi, Rory.
Hello.
Thanks for doing this. Much appreciated.
Absolute pleasure.
What I'm curious about is the response of the people that you impersonate. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about some of the ones who've maybe taken it most sportingly, and perhaps one or two taking it less sportingly.
And Tony Curry's got before you answer that, sorry, Tony's got a very similar question. So can you ask it at the same time? Then Rory can answer both together.
Yes, I mean, it was very similar. It says, what was the worst reaction to any of your impressions?
Well, it's funny because people don't really recognize themselves when you do them. So John and I Langdon, I mentioned earlier on, we used to say that imitation is the sincerest form of ridicule, not satire. People, you know, I remember doing Murray Walker once, and Murray Walker saying, well, I don't think I sound like that at all, but if he says I do, maybe I do. So often people don't recognize themselves. Some people are more thin-skinned. Tony Blair, I remember just before he became Prime Minister in 1996, just by complete coincidence, we happened to be in next door villages in France on holiday. And So I rang our office, said, is it true that Blair's down here next week? Because I'd met a Frenchman in a bar who said, you know, your socialist leader is coming. Socialist leader, there you go, 1996, is down here. I don't wonder what Corbyn would make of that. But anyway, so I said, so I rang the office and said, is Blair in the south of France? And the next thing I know, I get a phone call from Cherie Blair, of all people, saying, would you like to come and play tennis with Tony? And so, you know, there we were. And I'll cut a long story short, and so we ended up with an extraordinary tennis match with me and Tony Blair on one side, and Dave Stewart of the Eurythmics and Brian Ferry on the other. I mean, just extraordinary. And later that evening, we had Blair said, well, you know, I love your, my kids do impressions of you doing impressions of me. And one kid, I think it was Ewan, stood up and said, I like apple pie, unless of course you don't like cream. And he sort of Blair watched with this sort of mixture of kind of pride and slight embarrassment. And I said, well, he said, I love your John Major, you know. And I said, well, you know, if you'll become Prime Minister next year, the boot will be on the other foot. And, you know, I'll be doing you. And he said, golly, gosh, but how does Lord Bremner sound? Which was kind of his way. I've imitated people I did a couple of sort of prank calls, I suppose you could call them, and one of those was ringing up Peter Hayne as Gordon Brown, and it was the week before the election of 2005, and so we were ringing round, and one of them was Peter Hayne, and so I got through. We had a conversation, and towards the end of the conversation, I said, "So how are things going?" And Peter Hayne said, "Well, you know, things aren't going very well in Blaenau," and I just instinctively said, "Oh, Blaenau Festiniog." And there was a pause, and I thought, damn, because it's Blaenau Gwent was the constituency. And he stopped, and there was a pause, and he said, "You're not Gordon Brown, are you?" And so I thought, I've got to keep bluffing. So I said, no, keep going. Peter, don't be silly. Come on, we haven't got much time. And he said, very good. And he just, and so he rumbled me, and sort of hung up, and I thought, what can I do now? Because we were recording the calls. And so I rang him back about a minute later, as Tony Blair, saying, "Peter, did you just get a call from somebody pretending to be Gordon Brown?" And there's a pause, and he said, yeah, very, very funny, very funny. And later, much later, we were on David Frost or Andy Marr, David Frost, I think, together, and he was down the line, and we kind of crossed swords over he said we had an independent nuclear deterrent, and I said, what's independent about it? And he suddenly turned and said, "Well, we like your comedy, Rory, but I don't think, you know, I think when you start to get involved with politics," and he got very patronizing and very cross and slightly thin-skinned, which is extraordinary when you think how orange his skin is. You'd think it's supposed to be like an orange peel or something like that. But anyway, so yeah, but generally people kind of don't, I mean, I think in some ways people sort of, they're flattered until the material comes out. I mean, you know, can you do me yet? But the thing is, when people say, "Can you do me yet?" it's a little bit like the masochist and the sadist. You know, so the masochist says, "Please hurt me," and the sadist says, "No." And if somebody says, "Well, please, can you do me yet? Can you do me yet?" You think, "Oh, no. Am I going to do them, or am I going to say, no, you're actually," trouble is, some people are really very, very dull, and, you know, you can't get that voice.
But then some people aren't dull at all, are they? Very, I mean, one can't help. But you know, I think I could quite happily do the next 40 minutes of fingers. But
please don't.
Need a glass of what's your favourite tipple? Finger?
No, please don't do the next 40 minutes of fingers. I think the next question comes from Max Sawyer. Max, are you there?
Good evening, Rory.
Hello, Max. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Very good of you to spend your time with us. My question was very similar to the previous one, so I'll change it slightly. Do you have any favourite impressions? If so, why? And why do you think impressions are so amusing to the listener?
Well, often your most favourite is the one you've done most recently, or if you've sort of cracked one. So I suppose Jacob Rees-Mogg has been a recent addition. And, you know, one had to find some script for him because he's not been doing these coronavirus briefings. I don't know if you've noticed this. And that's because very early on they said, "We can't have you doing these government briefings, Jacob, because you look much too much like a bloody undertaker." Nevertheless, I had to think of something for him to do, and I thought he's quite Gilbert and Sullivan, isn't he? So I thought, well, why doesn't he do that? Talking of Tom Lehrer, why doesn't he do a sort of Gilbert and Sullivan, like the Major General song that Tom Lehrer did as the Elements song, but about Europe? So, well, here's a list of all the countries in Europe I can't see.
So that would have been it, but none of that is happening, I'm afraid, due to John's filming schedule.
Oh,
don't know what that was. What?
That was we were heckled by the bugle there.
It did sound like it.
That was Andy Zaltzman, but not.
A joke from my early days on the comedy circuit. So I do hope you enjoy this joke, buglers. Here it is. Queen Victoria walked into a bar, and the barman said, "Why the long face?" And Queen Victoria said, "Well, as a matter of fact, my husband has just died, leaving me with 9 fatherless children and a country to run. Cut me some slack." And the barman said, "Well, I see you're a bit upset about the death of your husband. That's understandable, but frankly, you should still consider it an honour and a privilege to govern your country, not just some kind of chore." And Queen Victoria said, "Come off it, mate. I slog my guts out for this country 24/7, 365. Besides which, I'm leading Britain to an era that many people will look back on as the high point of our nation's entire history." And the barman said, "Leave it out. The whole thing has been based on an arrogant and essentially racist imperialism, which will sow the seed of resentment around the world, which will blow up in Britain's face throughout the 20th century. And Queen Victoria said, "That's a simplistic and one-sided analysis." And the barman said, "Well, maybe, but it's still a valid point." And Queen Victoria said, "Just calm down, mate." And the barman said, "Me calm down? You're the one that needs to calm down. Your uptight attitudes towards sex is going to repress the entire British nation in the bedroom for over 100 years, leading ultimately to the cultural catastrophe of the Carry On films. You've got a lot to answer for. And anyway, with 9 children, you clearly don't mind a good scene to yourself, you hypocritical, saggy-titted old slag." And Queen Victoria said, "I'm not
Who's owner?
My husband." And the barman said, "Well, only because he looked like a bag of spanners." And Queen Victoria says, "What do you mean? What does a bag of spanners look like?" And the barman said, "It looks like you." And Queen Victoria said, "Look, mate, if you'd had 9 children, your tits would be a bit past their best as well." And the barman said, "Well, maybe, but you should count yourself very lucky to have 9 children still alive in mid-19th century Britain, what with the high infant mortality rates, poor sanitation, non-existent healthcare, and the general squalor that the vast majority of your people have to suffer. It's probably not so bad if you live in great castles. I don't think it's a bit irresponsible to have 9 children. That's going to be a huge burden on the taxpayer." And Queen Victoria said, "Oh, don't worry, mate, I'll just marry most of them off to other European royal families, ensuring a peaceful continental Europe for the foreseeable future." And the barman said, "Bullshit! Modern international politics needs more than a few strategic marriages to guarantee peace and stability. Personally, I cannot foresee anything over the next 100 years than a couple of massive wars." And Queen Victoria said, "Oh, for Christ's sake, just calm down and give me a pint of Guinness." And the barman said, "Pint of Guinness? I thought you'd gone to Ireland." Off. And Queen Victoria said, "Don't swear at me, I'm the Queen." And the barman said, "What are you going to do, cut my head off?" And Queen Victoria said, "Well, I might, you know." And the barman said, "You'll never get away with it. The whole concept of monarchy has radically altered in Britain over the last 500 years. It's not the Dark Ages anymore." And Queen Victoria said, "Well, you do very well to remember that I was chosen by God to do my job. Chosen by God. Did God choose you to do your job as a barman? Did he? And if he did, why did he make you so in it?" And the barman said, "No, I wasn't chosen by God. I just like the hours."
I'm not sure how long that's going to go, but that was Andy Zaltzman, wasn't it?
How did is Andy on?
Is he? If he's, I mean, I've just muted him because I can see a few people getting it. They want to hear you, but if that is, it sounded like Andy Zaltzman. If that is Andy, can you show your face?
I think
that was. I'll put you back on again.
No, I think actually that's taken from the Bugle. I think that's
right.
Playing an extract from the Bugle.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well. Okay. Well, so we'll.
So that was. I think that was part of a half-hour thing. But you just see Andy's speed and originality and.
Yeah. I think Andy Zaltzman is brilliant. But obviously people are here to see you today rather than listen to Andy Zaltzman.
Okay. So I don't know where that came from.
No. Should we? I was going to bring in Noel Kearns next, but I don't think Noel's here.
Noel Coward. Did I answer the last question?
I don't know if you did. You were answering Max's question about your favourite impressions.
Oh yeah. It varies. Sometimes Jacob Rees-Mogg, I was saying about him, like sort of thinking, well, here's a song about all the countries in Europe that I can't stand. There's Portugal and Italy and Poland and Romania, the Netherlands and Germany and France, Lithuania, Sweden, Spain and Hungary and Finland and Estonia, Slovenia, Slovakia and maybe Macedonia. There's Malta, Belgium, Greece, Czech Republic and Croatia, and Luxembourg and Cyprus, which is practically in Asia, and Austria and Latvia and Denmark and Bulgaria, and Ireland, and if Turkey joins the healthy get Muscaria. But once we're out of Europe, we'll no longer be inferior. We'll soon be doing trade deals with Burundi and Liberia. They want to stop us leaving, which is perfectly absurd of them. It's what the British public voted for, at least a third of them. Thank you very much indeed. So that was, that's where you have fun. Trump, I think, because Trump is a recent one. And I think you can always have, I was thinking today about, everyone's talking about Martin Luther King, James. Yes, Martin Luther King. And I knew him very well. I knew him very well. We were great friends, and we played a lot of golf together. And I remember Martin Luther King and I were very close. We were very, very close, so close. I shot him. In fact, that's how close we were. And but I knew Martin Luther King. I knew his sister, Billie Jean. And I was the last man she ever had. You know that, James? I turned her, but Billie Jean was not my lover. Okay, so you used to have endless fun with her. I mean, you know, just he would pretend that he was. You know, who's the guy who walked around his garden 100 times? What's the name? Major Tom. Okay, and I knew him. I met him on D-Day. We were on the same beach, and very, very remarkable gentleman. So Trump. But as I say, I have my reservations about it politically. I mean, I think the way he's carrying on right now, I mean, he may not be around in January next year. I mean, I don't think there'll be as much comic potential with Joe Biden. But anyway, so I used to enjoy doing Bill Clinton. That was always great fun because, you know, you could always be a little bit flirtatious, a little bit naughty. And that was one. I kind of looked like Bill Clinton. I could do that one. That was always good fun. Nelson Mandela. I would occasionally ring people up in Cape Town as Nelson Mandela. I would like to have a table for 2 people.
Fingers, you remember that because you went to see Desmond Tutu, didn't you, in his preaching in the Cape Town Cathedral.
So I should have sat at the back of one of Desmond Tutu's services and go, "What a load of rubbish! Call yourself a preacher." So yeah, so I think the short answer, it's often if you've just cracked a new impression that nobody else has managed to do yet, or if it's somebody who, I'll tell you how impressions work. When you start, you're listening to the voice and you're sometimes quite close and quite tight to the voice because you're trying to reproduce it. And then as time goes by, you become a little bit more used to it and you start to inhabit a little bit more. You start to inject a little bit more character. So you feel that you can actually carry that person, carry it on a little bit further. I mean, and voices sometimes bleed into each other. I was telling somebody about this the other day. If you're doing, I mentioned Tony Blair, but you know, I mean, obviously that was the way that he spoke. But if you've got Chris Tarrant, okay, so Chris Tarrant, there's another president of the Lords Taverners, and okay, here's your answer. Could it be A? And it was all very adenoidal like this, you know. But if you talk like that with Tony Blair, but with that you get Ed Miliband. I think it's really interesting the way the voices work, and that's one of the ways they do. You know, sometimes voices give you a clue. People think that my Boris Johnson, by Boris, is occasionally a little bit like Keith Floyd. But actually, you know, the one that was more like Keith Floyd was my David Cameron. And I think you know, there's a little bit of a similarity there. But David Cameron was a good fun satirically, because I think my favourite David Cameron line was saying, you know, I mean, when I started out as Prime Minister, you know, people said to me, are you going to make the rich richer? Are you going to make the poor poorer? I think we've managed to do both. And that's where the comedy and the satire come together, because there's a little bit of characterization, but also it's a short line, but it kind of sums up what was going on with the coalition, because during the coalition, the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. And I think, you know, the point of comedy and satire is if you make people laugh, but also there's a truth to it, and they're laughing because they recognize something or recognize an impression. That was your earlier point about why people like impressions. I think they love to recognize. They think, how you managed to do that voice? How is that voice coming out of that face? So, you know, you're getting a laugh for that. Hopefully you're getting a laugh for the joke. But if you're also releasing something in people that they go, that's it, that's what I don't like about that policy, or that you've managed, you're giving a voice maybe to people's anger or people's concerns or people's worries or whatever. So I think it kind of, in the best, the times it works best is when it's working on 3 levels. You know, good voice, good joke, and you know, a good political point of view.
Our next question is from Paul Graber.
Okay, well, actually, welcome, Rory. Thank you very much for doing this. And
My God, you're in the Niagara Falls.
No, they're actually the Iguazu Falls on the Brazil-Argentina border. But
have you got water lapping around your feet?
Yeah, it's pretty dangerous sitting here, actually.
I always wanted to get one of those, you know, those amazing sort of Chinese or Japanese photographs, or I think are they water paintings? So they're actually, you know, like that. But if you go into somebody's house and you think it's not straight, and you tip it up to the left, and suddenly all the water starts pouring out. But are you actually, you know, you're not calling us from Argentina?
No, I'm calling you from Guildford, and it's a fake background.
That's exactly what I wanted to do on these Zoom calls. Is I may get round to ending, to do it before the lockdown finishes properly, and that's to make up a board entirely. You know, the wallpaper you get that looks like books.
Yeah.
You know, you can get wallpaper that looks like a library, and just prop a big sort of board with a whole bookcase, which is just wallpaper. And halfway through the interview, just get somebody that just falls over, and you're just sitting in a garden somewhere, and you just completely. Anyway, sorry, that's your back. I can't see you without talking about your background.
That's quite all right, Rory. My question, and actually you've just led into it really nicely with what you were just saying about your Cameron impersonation and the three elements that need to come together. Most of the people watching this right now are of a relatively similar generation, and most of us grew up watching Mike Yarwood on the telly. In my opinion, Mike Yarwood was quite a decent impressionist, but most of his material was completely dull and anodyne. And I was just wondering what you felt about him.
Well, no, I think it's a bit unfair on Mike Yarwood, because first of all, I mean, I grew up watching Mike Yarwood. He's one of my idols and inspirations, and I used to watch his shows. I used to record his shows. Those are the days when you used to have those tape recorders, literally, you know, with the buttons and cassettes and all that sort of stuff. So I used to record those. The only thing I ever made in a woodwork class was a pipe, so I could do Harold Wilson, because he did that very well. And, you know, he did those northern voices because he was from the north himself, and so he could get a very good Harold Wilson, and he could get a very good... you know, a very good Andy Waring, and all that, and coming up to the sixth tackle, and all that. But here's a story. Years ago, when I just started out, now we were sort of young Turks at the BBC. I came up with the alternative comedian generation, you know, the comic strip, Alexi Sale, people like that were on the London cabaret circuit when I started, and to some extent in Edinburgh as well. So there's a little bit of a kind of culture shift between the sort of more traditional variety, we just say sometimes mother-in-law jokes, that kind of comedy, old style comedy, and the alternatives, which, you know, was more sort of more political, tended to be punching down, if you like, punching up instead of punching down. So instead of jokes about, you know, different races or mother-in-laws, it might be about politicians or about authority or whatever. But so Mike Yarwood was at the sort of tail end, and I remember the story that Bill Cotton, the old head of variety, head of comedy at the BBC, he was in a lift, and somebody said, "Why haven't we got satire on the BBC?" And Bill Cotton said, "Of course we've got satire. We've got Mike Yarwood." And we used to sort of say, "Ha ha ha, Mike Yarwood's not very satirical," but actually he was. I think he did. You look at some of his sketches of Harold Wilson were very good, of Edward Heath. And I think maybe the only, I remember one, Dennis Healy, of course, you know, Dennis Healy. If I say the words Dennis Healy, what do you think of his, what if I said Dennis Healy's catchphrase, what would you say?
Oh gosh.
gone back a while.
Well, it was silly Billy.
Silly Billy, yes.
Silly Billy, and that was Mike Yarwood, who called him a bit of a silly Billy. And I don't know where it came from, but I think ever after in life, when people bumped into Dennis Healy, they'd say, "Don't be a silly Billy." So it was kind of quite undermining. But you've got to remember, you know, for that time, I mean, yes, we'd had the satire kind of boom. We'd had the end of Deference. We'd had everything that David Frost was doing. And here's what Mike Yarwood did. He put impressions on the map, because impressions were always a little bit like ventriloquists. They were sort of further down the bill. They were sort of thought of as like a speciality act. But Mike Yarwood made it a headline act. Mike Yarwood is getting millions, 16 million, 18 million, maybe more on the BBC prime time. And so he kind of blazed a trail. I do remember he did a sketch, I think, where he played Dennis Healy, and Dennis Healy played his own sister,
sitting playing the piano or something like that, and thought, God, that's extraordinary. On one hand, it was kind of different and original. And on the other hand, was maybe they were, it meant that he was too close to the politicians, and I think he was too nice a guy to want to offend them. I think maybe that was the thing. And so who was doing the satire in the 70s, I wonder? Because we think of the 60s, we think very much of that was the week that was. But what was happening in the 70s? Any answers there? That was, I suppose it was different. It was cultural. It was Monty Python, wasn't it? And it was...
Yeah, there was a gap between the TW3 and David Frost type stuff, and then Spitting Image and It's Like, and you coming in the 80s, 90s. I don't think
I came in at a very political time, of course, because I came in with Thatcher and the miners' strike and all of that stuff. So when I started out, people were doing a lot of benefits, Jeremy Hardy and stuff. And people, you'd be doing lots of benefits for miners who would, hadn't been paid for months and months and months. And I think it was, and Reagan, of course, in America, it was a very political time. I mean, the 70s was, of course, because you had the 3-day week. I'm just trying to think. It was he was a gentler, kinder comedian, but very good impressionist, a really, really good impressionist. And he was able, because at that time we only had 3 channels, didn't we? BBC One, BBC Two, and ITV. So as a nation, we sat down to the same meal at the end of the day, in a way. So all these characters, whether it was David Attenborough or Bob Monkhouse, of course I remember Big Bob, Big Bouncing Bob. He was very good at Bob. Who else did he do? Bruce Forsyth. He did a bit of Bruce Forsyth. And he had these characters who were absolute household names, and everybody recognized them. So, and Dave Allen, he did a very good Dave Allen. So I suppose, every era has their types of comedy, and an era of the big Saturday night blockbuster entertainment shows. And Mike Yarwood was there doing all the characters from those, and a few politicians thrown in. But I won't diss Mike Yarwood, because I loved his work, and and he was one of my early influences.
I was going to ask Tom Burridge to come in now, but he's. Can you unmute yourself? Right, Tom, you're in. Do you want to ask a question?
Hi. Yeah, hi Rory. Thanks for doing this. You touched on some of this earlier, but I'm really interested in kind of who the performers are that you really admire. Who did you model yourself on as you were coming up, and who are the sort of the great unknowns? Who are the young up and comers we need to go off and scour YouTube for? Who are the ones that we really should be keeping an eye out for the future?
Well, I mentioned Andy Zaltzman. I mean, he's not a sort of breaking talent, this one, but he's been around for a long time. In fact, we did our first show together in '84, and that's Mark Steele. Mark Steele, who's great, he's a very, very funny man. And his show, Mark Steele's in Town, which is on Radio 4, wonderful, where he goes to different towns or cities, he goes to different towns, and he does half an hour on... if you remember Brian Johnson used to Down Your Way, but it's a little bit like that. But he researches it, writes it with Pete Sinclair, and it's the most wonderful thing where you've got people in a town or village rocking with laughter as this comedian has turned up, who's researched them, found out about all this little things in the town. I mean, he did one on Berwick-on-Tweed, which is just glorious. He said Berwick-on-Tweed, he said, we changed hands so many times, all these battles, and it was English, it was Scottish, and it went back to English. And eventually about like 1257 or so, he went back to the English. And they said, what did the town, the mayor of Berwick-on-Tweed make of going back to England again? And he said, oh, thank God for that. He said, I couldn't stand another Scottish winter. And so I love Mark. He's very, very good on the radio. I mentioned Rob Deering. Have a look at him. His sort of comedy is very, very funny. Who else? Eddie Izzard. Again, he's been going for... So up and coming, let me think. So Matt Ford, I mentioned to you. Have a look at sort of some of his stuff. Who do I go and see? Jess Robinson, female impressionist, singer, so talented as a singer. She does wonderful singing impressions, everyone from Beyonce to Catherine Jenkins to Julie Andrews. And she mixes things. So she'll have, Julie Andrews singing It's All About the Bass, or, Edith Piaf singing Hit Me Baby One More Time, or whatever. So she mixes those around. There's a wonderful review double act called Raymond and Mr. Timkins, which I love. Raymond and Mr. Timkins. They're very, very good. I'll try and come back with a few more that just make me laugh. But
Rory, you mentioned Mark Steele, who I know a little bit. He's a Crystal Palace fan.
Oh,
as
yeah.
am I. And I just wondered if you'd talk about your up and coming comedians. Have you come across his son Elliot Steele?
Oh, Elliot, yeah. Well, no, it's funny because I mentioned Jan Ravens earlier on, and they've got sons. Jan Ravens' son, he's sort of up and coming. Is Louis? I think it's Louis Brown. I think because Jan was married to Steve Brown. But no, I've not seen Elliot. Yet. But I did see Mark at the festival a couple of years ago, and he did a whole show about his breakup and his divorce, and it was just all raw and angry, but very, very, very funny. And Mark is one of those people who, like Jeremy Hardy, he can go off on a rant, and it's just hilariously funny because it's the idea of somebody getting worked up about something in the way that John Cleese used to do in 40 Towers, and it would just become more and more outright, but he'd still be in control of it, but the images would be more and more extravagant and funny. So I love that. I mean, I'm a kind of quite an easy crowd. I laugh quite easily. Jeremy Hardy, he was
absolutely brilliant,
absolute
wonderful comedian.
And if you haven't got a chance to listen to any Jeremy Hardy stuff, he did Jeremy Hardy Speaks to the Nation, Addresses the Nation, or Speaks to the Nation. He did a lot of Clue. I'm sorry, I haven't a clue. He was wonderful. Then died, as you know, about sort of 18 months ago. Yeah. Trying to think who else I tried to get to do shows. Oh, there's a young magician who's very funny and very, very got incredible energy. That's Archie Manners. I don't know if you come across Archie.
Yeah.
Archie probably does a lot of shows, and he's very funny as a sort of close-up stand-up magician. But he's just also very funny and outrageous, and he's been doing some pranks recently. He got Katie Hopkins to go to Prague to pick up an award.
Yes, I saw that. That was on YouTube.
And I think it was for the something like for the Committee for Uniting National Treasures, and you can imagine what those words, if the first letter of each word there, the Committee for Uniting National Treasures, and she was picking up an award which was shortened to the letter. So when she was picking up the award, and behind her was Flash, so it was the whole thing was a setup to sort of get back at Katie Hopkins. So yeah, he was good. So these people that I remember, you often see in Edinburgh, which of course isn't going to happen this year. I remember seeing Michael McIntyre in Edinburgh about 10 years ago and thinking, oh, well, he's got a lot of energy and a lot of, he's very good at sparring with the audience. And then a couple of years later, I mean, he's absolutely everywhere, Michael McIntyre. But that's the place to sort of see these up and coming acts. I like Andy Maxwell. He's another political comedian. I quite like the political comedians for the reasons I said earlier, because I always like the ones who kind of make sense out of things by making nonsense of them.
Yeah. Do you mind a couple of political questions now? Our next one is from Stephen Boyle. Stephen.
Hi, Rory. Back in 2014, you were a supporter of the no vote in the Scottish independence referendum. Given the current political landscape, has your view changed?
Now, so what about you? Let's talk about, where are you from now?
Glasgow originally.
You're from Glasgow originally. I had real difficulty in 2014 because it was the first of the referendums which really kind of split the country and split Scotland, and like the Brexit referendum split Britain. We've had these kind of where things became very tribal, and back in 2014, I'm classically, like a lot of Scots, I was born and brought up in Edinburgh, and then I made success down in England, and so I'm kind of Anglo, but I always think of myself as a Scot at heart, but British, and then within that also European, sort of like a little, just like a Russian doll, if you like. And I didn't anticipate Brexit, so I was a unionist. I believed strongly in that we were better together, because if you look back historically, each would encourage the other. Like penicillin. That was Alex Fleming, and he was working in St Mary's in Paddington. So there was a brilliant Scottish inventor working in an English hospital. You had John Logie Baird, who invented the television, and that was in London, in Mayfair. And Dolly the sheep, which was made in Scotland, but with money from the English Department of Agriculture. And I kind of felt that, we had the best of both worlds. We could be Scottish when we wanted to be Scottish, but we could be part of a united kingdom. It wasn't just being part of England, it was part of a united kingdom. And then Brexit came along, of course. And both Scotland and Northern Ireland voted to stay in the European Union, and England and Wales voted to leave. And so when Scotland was taken out of the European Union against its will, then, that suddenly there becomes a real democratic problem there, because I was very conflicted, even in 2014, because a lot of my friends were pro-independence, and they always seem to, there's another good comedian, Jo Caulfield, she's a female comedian, Jo Caulfield, and she said, the Yes campaign looked like they were having a much better party than the No campaign did. The parallels between the No campaign and Scottish independence and the Remain campaign, somehow or other, neither managed to be inspiring. It seemed to be that the Yes campaign and the Brexit campaign had, very different campaigns, obviously, had more energy in a way. And the No could never quite match the argument, although No won in Scotland. And so when the Unionists won in 2014, I felt bad for the people who lost, because it was like their dream was an independent Scotland, and I felt guilty that I'd kind of taken that dream away. But it's just the way that I saw Scotland, the way that I saw my country, was that we were like my view of Brexit, that we were better as being part of. That we could punch even more above our weight together in a bigger community. But I had a lot of, I had a very hard time on Twitter. I made a lot of enemies, and it really taught me for the first time just how divided we are. So what do I think now? I think that a referendum, a second referendum, you can see if Scotland's taken out of Europe and wants to be part of Europe, there's a question to be asked there. But then you look at Brexit and you think, what is it about Brexit that makes, and how difficult that has been to come out of a union with a country or a group of countries which are your neighbours and your biggest trading partners, that is so incredibly difficult as Brexit. And imagine if it was Scotland leaving the United Kingdom. Logistically that would be incredibly difficult too. But I can't say that I blame them, because what does Scotland want to do with Boris Johnson? It's bad enough when David Cameron and George Osborne turned up. It was like having Edward I and Will Carling arrive in Edinburgh. So that's a bit of a ramble. So I kind of still think in my DNA, I'm against the trend here. There's all this sort of, the nationalism that's sweeping around, and we're getting a lot of the strong men, Trump, Bolsonaro, Orban, Xi in China, who are spending a lot of time dismantling and undermining the institutions like the World Health Organization or the United Nations or NATO or the European Union, which were put in place after the Second World War to undo some of the damage done by the last lot of nationalist strongmen. So I'm very perturbed by all that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Go on, John Hegarty now. This is sort of vaguely political, but I think we're going to go back to impressions again, aren't we, John?
Absolutely. This is great fun. Thank you.
You're fine.
You were famous for calling up MPs and spoofing them as John Major over the phone.
Oh yes, yes.
Have you called up Matt to share his pain yet, or Don to find out his weekend travel plans? Matt Hancock to share his pain.
I say my Scottish thing. No, I haven't. I think it's a difficult thing. Now it's, oh God. I think because Corona is such a sort of ghastly thing to wrestle with. I think you probably could do it more with Brexit, and probably more with Trump on if America wasn't on fire. What was the last time I rang somebody up or somebody else? can't remember when that was. I mean, the sketch I did on Sunday with Matt Ford, for the first time, there's a thing called deep fake. Have you come across this? Where the technology is so brilliant now that they can take my face and they can map all the coordinates, and then they can calibrate that with Boris Johnson's face or Donald Trump's face or whatever. So I was being Boris and Matt Ford was being Donald Trump. And the sketch that we've done, we wore a little bit of makeup, we wore things. We had to do this at a distance, obviously, because of lockdown. But that's now currently in America, where the sketch that we did playing the different characters, our face is being put by computers into Boris and Donald's faces, and you will not be able to see. It will look absolutely authentic. So that's a kind of. It's a really, deep fake is really fascinating because it's now so good. You don't know what's true and what isn't. It's an interesting thing because it can work the other way around. So when Prince Andrew, for example, we see that picture of Prince Andrew with his arm around the teenager. And then he says, well, I don't know, I can't remember being there. Is that my hand? Is that me? And so fake is now so good that people can look at something which, to all intents and purposes, is true and dismiss it as a fake. So it's a fascinating area. So I called up Margaret Beckett as Gordon Brown. We talked about the cabinet for a bit. The most fun, I think, was years ago, was calling up Richard Body as John Major and asking him to come to the Conservative conference and to dance with John Major on the last night. And Richard Body was sort of quite confused by this stage and said, yeah, well, of course, yes, of course I'll dance with you. But they were always they were always kind of nervous moments because, the crew, we were recording it and somebody's picking up the phone and you've got to improvise a conversation where you're being John Major or Gordon Brown, or I often thought I should have done it as David Frost, who was great friends with George Bush. And I said, oh, George, how lovely, how are things? How are the boys? And I expect have you been out with the boat? But I was such good friends with David Frost. He used to go through his wonderful parties where he'd say, oh, come on in, Rory, come and meet the Pinochets. He'd meet these remarkable people. So I kind of felt in some way it would be too unfair to David to do that. But so I haven't been doing phone calls, but we have been doing something which may fool people, or may look very authentic, and maybe the BBC will be doing that. We don't know yet. It's still in the pilot stage.
Thank you.
But we're going to turn now to cricket, if that's all right. And I think I've got Peter Richardson next, followed by Tony Curry. Peter, are you there?
Yes, I am. Yes. Good evening, Rory, and thank you very much for your time.
Hello.
Hi. I think hello.
Yes, I'm here. Yep,
we can hear you.
Yeah. No, sorry. Yes. Yeah. I read once that in your 24 hours of fantasy, you like to see England skittle the Aussies out at Lords. Connected with that question, what do you look forward to when coming to Lords? What do you dislike when you're at Lords? And who would be your ideal partner to watch a day at cricket at Lords?
Well, it's it's the atmosphere, isn't it, with Lords? You love that. And, I love that walk around the ground, which you do once or twice, and to sometimes, to the slightly quieter parts like the nursery end. Lords is wonderful, even when it's empty. I've done shows at Christmas where you look out on the ground with snow on the ground, and you'll know this. If you look out from that pavilion when it's, when there's not a match being played, and all the memories come into your mind, and you just think of the times that you've had there, or just imagine the crowd there, or feel the atmosphere. It's such a special place for that reason. I tend to go to matches. I tend to I can't remember being there when something amazing happened. I missed both the World Cup final because my daughter is into show jumping, and we were in a lorry coming back from a show jumping event in Devon, I think. So we were listening on the radio, to give credit to my family, who aren't normally into every ball of Test Match Special. They were glued. But I missed that, and I missed the amazing Headingley Test because we were on holiday in Greece. We were clustered around my iPhone listening to Test Match Special because we'd lost the signal on the television. But when I go to games, it's generally a dull. I remember going to Trent Bridge, and that was the day when England didn't take a wicket all day. It was Australia ended on 327. It was Jeff Marsh and Taylor. and Ian Botham dislocated his finger trying to catch one. It was Mike Atherton's first Test match. So I tend to go on bad days. But if I was wanting to watch that, I'd be very lucky. And these are people who I would normally go to Lords with. Tim Rice, great friend, great cricket lover. Mark Nicholas, I mentioned him beforehand. Anthony Reiford. Now, I don't know. I don't know how many of you would know Anthony Reiford, but I've known him for many years. We've been on holiday together, and for his 50th, I think he's got a very distinctive laugh. So we did the Laughing Policeman, which I know a man called Reiford. He works for Omnicom. I ask him, he knows just where he's going to and where he's coming from. I ask him if he likes to laugh. He says, I do, my friend. The trouble is that when I start, I don't know how to end. And we had about 150 people in a room just going. So he hosted us in the Aussies were there last summer or the summer before. No, last summer with Marion, his wife, and Stephen Fry was there as well, who's always great company. Mark Steele, I'd love to have there. Kumar Sangakkara, who, of course, is your president this year. And I thought that was a wonderful pick on Anthony Reiford's part because I think that internationalized the MCC. I think Kumar is just a wonderfully elegant and graceful and intelligent and wonderful cricketer and an intelligent man. I mean, it's been his misfortune that his time as president has been overshadowed by not having any cricket.
I don't know if you know, but he's actually agreed to stay on for another year. So we're very happy about that.
I mean, that's good because when he was named, I did a thing in May last year, such a happy memory, again, for Anthony in the long room. And it was one of those evenings, I still get nervous and about after dinner speaking, and you want to get it right, you want to do it right. And it was such a happy evening. It was May, we had so much to look forward to. And Kumar had just, as I say, he was just being announced. And I think it was, as soon as the announcement was made, Twitter and sort of other social media, so many positive things came in. So, that's really good, that's imaginative, and that's really made Lords. That's opened it up to the whole subcontinent and to Asia and all the cricket lovers to feel that they weren't excluded. It wasn't. I don't think it was a piece of political correctness. I think it was just a really shrewd thing. It's not for the first time because Anthony, of course, was very instrumental in getting Lords to admit women members, lady members, and that was because he realised you couldn't stage World Cups and be one of the great world venues and still be men only. It was just. I do remember though once actually doing a show at Muirfield on the eve of the Open at Muirfield. Again, lovely venue, brilliant venue. And I hadn't really realised, I hadn't thought about this. I didn't know that they were a male-only club at Muirfield. And I thought, oh God, I'm going to get into a bit of trouble here with my friends. But luckily, the Scottish government had just passed legislation to allow, for the first time, to allow same-sex marriages. So I get to Muirfield and I say, it's wonderful, it's fantastic that same-sex marriage can happen. So for the first time, a married couple can join Muirfield. So that a few members looked up at that. But I said, but technically, of course, they can't actually get on the course because technically that is a 4-ball. So I love the atmosphere of grounds. Yes, so the people I've mentioned, and Marion, yes, Reiford's wife, Alison Mitchell, your namesake, James, who I think is such a one. I love her commentary. It's just there's always a smile in her voice, and I think she's been a breath of fresh air to Test Match Special. But it's just, I think Lords is a memory bank, isn't it? You're members, so you know. But I mean, each time you walk through those gates, your mind will be shuffling through at sort of warp speed. It's like people say when you die and your life flashes in front of you. I think as you walk through the gates of Lords, all the times you've been there must flash. It's a wonderful sort of moment. It's just but also you're walking down memory lane, but just about to enjoy new memories. So it's such a special place. And as I say, as redolent, empty as it is when it's full.
Thank you. Tony Curry is got a question similar to ones we've asked, but a little bit different. Tony, do you want to come in?
Yes, thanks, James. Yes, you've already impinged on some of the things I was going to ask actually there, Rory, but thanks very much for coming on as well. I'm sure I'm not the only one that looked back at the BBC site to look at your appearance on Test Match Special 40 years, about almost 40 years ago, as a young comedian. When you were in the box at Edgbaston, and
yes,
Richie Benno came in and surprised you at the end after you'd been mimicking him. But the ground you've talked about, Cape Town, you've talked about Lords and Trent Bridge. I mean, you obviously love your cricket and travel a lot to see it. But how do you match that with the sort of itinerant life that you must lead as a, sort of going on and doing different shows in different places?
I've been very, very lucky, but I've never been to Australia in my life. I've never been. So I wish I'm not sure I could do it now. But I wish, when I was perhaps, the sort of height of doing TV stuff because I didn't know that they get Parkinson shows in Australia. So I think some people had seen me on Parky, but it's just, I know, never, the invitations have never came up, or to do the Melbourne Festival or whatever. And as I say, now it's different. But so never been to Australia, but Cape Town was Alan Lamb who saved my life in a way, because I just got divorced. It was 1994, 95. I was a little bit lost. And Lammy said, I've got my testimonial. I've got my testimonial coming up. And I always used to take the piss out of Alan Lamb and say, hey, Rory, have you heard about John McCarthy? He's been held hostage in Debenhams. And I'd say, I think you're in Lebanon, Lammy. So I'd always take the piss. So Lammy was always a great friend, and he came to our wedding and when I got married again. But anyway, so Lammy said, would you like to come and do a show for me in Cape Town? You could do your Nelson Mandela and stuff. So Lammy got me out where I stayed at the Sellers Hotel in Hohenort, in near Constantia, out that way. And that changed my life. I had the most wonderful time. Tim Rice was out there, Reeford was out there, and I spent 3 weeks in Cape Town, and the cricket was happening, and there was a nightclub called Hemingway's, and I remember driving back to Sellers and getting to my room, and it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and I thought, what am I doing? It's only 3 in the morning. This is ridiculous. Getting in the car and driving back to the nightclub. And so Newlands, they were test match, although of course, it was the 90s. Mike Atherton, who I was thinking the other day, he was in a sense, he was the captain during what William Hague would have described as the night shift. When William Hague, he said, I was a Tory leader during the night shift, when things weren't going terribly well for the Tory party and things weren't going terribly well for England cricket. So Newlands, you'd have these depressing things where England looked like they were doing well. And then who was the Lancashire off-spinner? Mike Watkinson managed to run out Graham Thorpe, and the test match and dribbled away and we lost. These are holidays. So I had holidays in Cape Town for about 5 or 6 years in a row in the late 90s and early 2000s. Just loved those. We took a cottage in Constantia, rented that with Anthony Reeford, your erstwhile president. Played golf. Ronnie Armis, who some of the members will remember, he died about 5 years ago, is my best friend, and we played golf at Clovelly and Royal Cape, and they were just happy times. Been lucky to go to the West Indies and watch cricket, but again, when England lost very badly at St Vincent of all places, and I was locked out of my room, and so they said, why don't you share with Jack Russell? And I got to Jack Russell's room, and it absolutely reeked of turpentine and white spirit. I thought Jack Russell must wake up in the morning completely drunk on turpentine and white spirit, because he had these paintings that were drawing, and I think he tried to wash his, the hat, the white, sort of like a beach hat. And to dry it, he put it on the lamp in the hotel, but it had caught fire. So he was so wonderfully eccentric, Jack Russell. He used to say that he was like his namesake, and he was always barking. I remember, yes, I did his testimonial in Bristol one night, and everyone else was having steak and it was whatever it is, or lamb or roast potatoes, at a cricket dinner, and he had Weetabix and a banana. And I said, he was so, I thought he'd not a care in the world. His big worry, his biggest concern, I said at the time, was whether to stand up or stand back for the loyal toast. But anyway, So that was West Indies, St Vincent, and I was at Barbados when Mark Ramprakash got his maiden Test century. Saw cricket at Antigua. Loved that. Went to the World Cup in '96. I ended up in Rawalpindi. Jeffrey Boycott said, "Here, what have you got? What's that got to eat? Look, I've got an apple here. Have this. Don't have the local muck. Here, have one of mine. I've got an apple here. Have that." And that was good. And then going down to where did I go? Not to Lahore, and later on to Karachi, and just great time. So I mean, it struck me as, I mean, wouldn't you, just to be a cricket reporter and to go to these places? I mean, some of them are quite miserable. And you think, why are you miserable? You going to? I remember in the West Indies, the first early on in the tour, and I think that they just started the tour. There was their training session, and Christopher Martin Jenkins arrived, and I saw him at the hotel. And then I saw him go off that evening and walk off down the beach. And it was the very beginning of the tour, and he'd obviously arrived the day before. And I thought, you know, he's walking down the beach, and he's going to be in the West Indies for 2 months, reporting on the sport that he loves. I mean, how wonderful to go to Australia, to South Africa, to New Zealand, again, not something else that I've never been. So it's a tremendous, and also by definition, you're going where the sun shines, a bit like the golfers. So, you know, it's what's not to like, the sun is shining.
Rory, we normally end these sessions after an hour. We've still got a couple of people who want to ask questions.
Yeah.
All right to go on?
Sorry, I'm probably going on too long.
Are you right for another 2 questions?
Yeah, I'm not doing it. It's lockdown. I'm doing nothing.
Okay. Well, Noel Kearns, who was supposed to come in earlier, but I couldn't find him. He's now.
I thought you said Noel Coward for a minute.
No. This is Noel Kearns. So Noel, are you there?
I'm here, James.
Go ahead.
Hello.
I know.
Lovely.
Hello.
Oh, there's a memorabilia collector.
Oh, you can see.
Let's see. Hang on. I'll see if I can identify. Oh, okay. I can't see. Is that? Ooh. Is that David Gower in the bottom there?
No, I'm afraid that is Sir Garfield.
Garfield, indeed. Yes.
Garfield, and that not Garfield. Sir Garfield Sobers, and this
is Richard Hadley.
Richard Hadley. You're very correct.
Who I remember, I played with Richard Hadley once. It was at Victor Blank's ground, and David Frost was keeping wicket. And you may have heard this. I think I told Mark Nicholas' story. David Frost was keeping wicket to Richard Hadley. Hold that thought. So the first ball comes whistling down straight past the batsman, and it's heading towards David's groin at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And everyone goes, "Oh shit, this is not going to end well." It was like, you know, everything stopped. Birds stopped mid-flight. You held your breath. There's this thing, this ball with a sort of lick of flame behind it. It's going, and it heads straight towards David's nuts. At the very last minute, David gets his wicket-keeping gloves together, and they came together like some sliding garage doors, and the ball landed there with a great thunk, and there was a huge sigh of relief, and people said, "Oh, David, well done, David. Thank God for that." And David said, "The alternative does not bear thinking about." Richard Hadley. Sorry, your question, Noel.
I thought you were going to say, "Hello, good evening, welcome."
Hello, good evening.
Thank you.
Well done.
Yeah, these 2 pictures, just quickly, I got them from Bashir Hassan, a Kenyan international cricketer who played at Notts with both of them.
Yes, he did. The most extraordinary stance he had.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Anyway, I just wanted to before I go to my question, if I can, I just was minded that I was paying attention to government announcements early this evening.
Oh, yeah, well done you. Yes, get on.
And if I remember correctly, this is what the Prime Minister said. Move on, draw a line, and fuck off.
Yeah, they're my words exactly. No, how right you are. That was the words of the great Prime Minister, Captain Corona.
Correct. Correct. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I'll ask a question, and I'll tell you a bit about that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. B. Right, you've partly shaded my question, because I was going to ask you, have you ever met Billy Birmingham? But of course, you've not been to Australia.
No.
So, did you? But in any event, did you ever watch any of his 12-man recordings?
I heard a few of them, and I knew of him when we were doing under 19. I never saw him. I mean, he was very good Benno impression. Although I don't think that Richie Benno liked it very much. interestingly enough. I always got on very well with Richie Bennett. I always admired him. I thought he's a tremendously very shrewd judge of the game. He always said, you know, the great thing about captaincy, it's 80% luck and 20% skill, but don't try it without the 20%. And then the other one I said, and there's Glenn McGrath out for one, just 99 runs short of what would have been a remarkable century. So I loved his sense of humour. No, never met Billy Birmingham. So I did my sort of spoof record, which is Richie Bennett. I'll go back a little bit to the as you talked about draw a line, move on, and fuck off. That's because, so I was doing this sketch on Sunday, as I say, but I had the wig because they'd sent me a wig, and I had some Boris photographs, and I like to do Boris tweets every now and again. And I hadn't done one for about a week, and I'd had this idea going around my head about, you know, about Dominic Cummings. You know, saying, you know, if you've been a father as long as I have, and indeed as often as I have, then you will know the instinct to go the extra mile, and indeed the extra 30 miles, indeed to have your eyes tested. So anyway, it was along those grounds, and I thought along those lines, and I thought, okay, I'll do that one. So I had the wig and the photograph. So I just pointed my face towards the camera and did a sort of 53-second video, put it up on Twitter, and I'll look now, actually, in real time. So that was 2 days ago. Okay, and I look at this, and that has now been seen 1,059,527 times. It's just crazy, isn't it? So you just do a little sketch, put it on Twitter, and that one's gone over a bit. It's over 1 million views. It's just extraordinary. So I didn't think it was one of the best scripts. So that maybe the next one will be Donald Trump talking about Martin Luther King, like I did earlier. But it's just a weird thing about social media that, and also about this time, this extraordinary time. People say, you know, should we be making fun of all this? But people say the laughter is the best medicine. I don't think it is, by the way. I think the best hydroxychloroquine. That's the best. Hydroxychloroquine, or shine a torch up your ass. That's where those are what you do. Or I remember John Frankham once. You know, John Frankham, the jockey, and he said, "There's Rory. They say laughter is the best medicine. Although I dare say, if you're diabetic, a bit of insulin wouldn't go amiss." Very fun. So I think the reason, these tweets, there's a great appetite, I think, because people like to share, and all these memes that are going around on WhatsApp and on Twitter and stuff, because, you know, where people like to, it comes together. It's the spirit. It's quite a British thing as well. I think it's a coming together. It's a sharing. It's a very sort of communal thing, and comedy and humor and comedy can bring people together. But increasingly now, going right back to what I was saying at the beginning, you know, there is much more of a political element, and Brexit divides people, Scottish independence divides people, and, you know, you find that your comedy is judged by people on the other side of the argument, and they are very cross and very angry, and they will tell, you know, they'll say how useless my impressions are, or I'm a has-been, or whatever, and I look down their timeline and I realise that we're not on the same page politically, and that's sad, because I think those wounds of those referenda are going to take a long time to heal.
Well, I think we do need to bring this to an end fairly soon, but I've got Nick Gandon, who's one of our committee members, so I think I ought to ask him to come in, and also Max Sawyer. Nick and Max, if you'd like to ask your questions one after the other, then Rory can finish.
I'll give you a quick answer.
The two of you. Nick.
Oh, thank you very much. Rory, you've done Boyks, and you've done Benno, and indeed you've done a bit of Benno this evening for us. My question is, you know, who else are you about to do? And coupled with that is a question about the modern cricketer and whether they're so well media trained that they've become, frankly, a little bit dull and provide you less opportunity to take the mickey.
Okay, well, I'll come at it in a slightly different way. I haven't sort of got any new impressions. I mean, there's the cricketers I haven't done. I always have great fun doing David Gower because the thing I like about David Gower is he's very, very understated. You know, he won't say that was plumb LBW. He'll say, I think it's fair to say that was not unadjacent, and he's that sort of lovely sort of English understatement. And you know, you won't say we went out and got pissed last night. You say, I think it's fair to say a certain amount of alcohol was consumed. a fairly good time was had by all, and we went to bed tired but happy. So I haven't got so many. I haven't got a brand new cricket impression, but in terms of the character, I think it was right across the board, not just sport, but politics as well. And that was, I think it happened in the 90s, really, late 80s, 90s, because we'd had a very flamboyant, we'd had the Buccaneers, hadn't we? We'd had Gower, we'd had Botham, we'd had Lamb, and we had kind of flamboyant cricketers. And then we hit the 90s, and it was the Mickey Stewart era and the Graham Gooch era, and it suddenly became a lot more serious, and it became a lot more professional, and literally there was no room for a character like Gower. And when he sort of flew his tiger moth with John Morris, is that right, over the ground, that was a stunt too far for the serious-minded people running English cricket at that time. And I think the 90s, I refer to it as the night shift, but the 90s was a kind of, I mean, there was it, yes, when did Mike Gatting win the Ashes? Was that
86?
86, and did we
86, 87?
Okay, and so that a really strong Australian side, Alan Border's team, came over in 89, didn't it? We could never get Steve Waugh out. And from right through the 90s, watching England cricket was quite a depressing time, which is why 2005 was so incredibly liberating. But, you know, it wasn't, you know, there was, who was around in the 90s? But then by the 2000s, we had the Freddie Flintoffs, we've got the Ben Stokes, we've got these flamboyant big characters. And in a way, I think it was you see it in rugby, how people like Danny Cipriani and stuff, you know, they don't get a game because in a sense, you know, they're maverick. And Kevin Peterson, I suppose you could say ultimately, because he was too much of a maverick, but actually I think it was slightly different issues there. But in politics as well, you know, you had characters. That's my daughter. What's she saying? Supper. She's saying
we best make this the last question. I think I'm sorry about all those who are waiting.
Don't worry. So try very quickly. And so in politics, and suddenly we go with this very serious age where the coalition, where they were quite dull. You know, you're very welcome to try and do Phil Hammond or George Osborne or Jeremy Hunt, but you know, there's not the flamboyance or the fun or the character of a Tony Blair or thank you. Okay.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sorry for all those. We've got
a very quick one.
We could. Well, okay. Well, Max wanted to ask you about your love of opera and translation. So Max, do you want to come in and ask your question?
Simply, Rory, why does opera appeal to you so much?
Well, I sort of got into it in the sort of mid-90s, and then somebody, Charles Hazelwood, who was on Desert Island Discs last week, got in touch, and he knew I did German at university, and he knew I liked opera, and so he said, would I translate a Kurt Weill opera that they were doing in the East End of London? And so I did that. That was Kurt Weill's Silbersee, which is sort of music theatre rather than opera, although I'm never quite sure where one finishes and the other starts. Then I did Carmen for the South African company that he started up there. Then I did Orpheus in the Underworld for Scottish Opera. And I've just done another Kurt Weill and Bertolt Brecht one, which is The Seven Deadly Sins, which I'm looking for a home now because the festival I was doing it for was cancelled. But I just love the exercise of sitting down with a score and with a dictionary and with a rhyming dictionary. And we used to, when we were doing Bremen, Bird and Fortune, play with lyrics and rewrite songs. And like I did earlier on with Jacob Rees-Mogg, or I did with Jerry Adams once, we did an Irish peace process one, which is right said me, time to stop the violence, call us ceasefire, that's the way to go. Face the fact, need another tactic. We were getting nowhere. And that ended, how did that end with Major had to think, and he said we ought to seek clarification of the Downing Street Declaration, but it did no good, sure, I never thought it would. All right, said John, time to scrap your weapons, those their weapons are going to have to go. We said wait first, let's negotiate first, shouldn't have got us somewhere, you'd say, but John said we had to give a guarantee, and we said Norway. Anyway, we used to rewrite lyrics, rewrite songs, and doing opera was just the same thing. But instead of writing something for comedy, you were just translating from one to another. And it brought together things that I loved, brought together languages which I love, music which I love. It made I had to start learning to read music again, and it was like solving a crossword puzzle. And then, of course, the end, you don't have to actually do it on stage. You can actually watch somebody else do it, or you can sit while Jonathan Miller, as he did, directs Carmen, and learn from him and watch these other people. And these buggers are going to get up on stage and do it every night, and you can just you can watch it and go home.
Rory, thank you so much for a really enjoyable 90 minutes. Everybody, if you'd like to unmute yourselves and give Rory a round of applause.
Can I just before that, Rory?
Yeah, Rory, thanks so much.
Can I just say, done me a huge favour. Incidentally, I was there at that Lammy dinner for in Cape Town, and I think it was the first occasion you ever did Nelson Mandela, and you were very nervous about it.
It was.
Well, I just wanted to say, I don't know why you're not a member of the MCC, but I don't know if you blackballed or whiteballed.
Very long
there are 150 odd people here who would be thrilled to propose you, I would expect.
Definitely.
Oh, that's very kind. That's so kind. Well, I hope we get some cricket before too long. That's all I can say.
Let me
see you at Lord's, and if you're on the call and you see me at Lord's, then come and say hello.
Thank you very much. Look, before we
buy a life membership.
Before we go, can I just remind everybody that next week's guest is Jeff Dusty Miller, and that's likely to be next Wednesday at the earlier time of 6 p.m. But I will confirm that in the usual way. So thank you once again.
Great fun.
Rory Bremner, you've been brilliant, and thanks to everybody for joining us.
Thank you,
again
Rory.
very soon.
Well done.
Be safe and well.
Well done, Rory. Well done.
Thank you, everybody.
Well done.
Thanks.